Hello, I'm Dr. Cheryl Walton. I work for the Assistant Secretary of Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition via the Deputy's Office, the Deputy for Research and Development. Okay, our biggest challenge has been for the last year and a half, couple of years, accelerating acquisition. This, to give you a little background, I've been in acquisition for most of my career, and I've seen the acquisition reforms over and over, and much of the first panel's discussion I resonate with very well. So when we decided that we were going to try to do rapid prototyping, that was our method of going into accelerating the acquisition. We stood up a rapid prototyping office, and we looked around and we said, okay, before we do this, instead of going out and putting everything on paper, and instead of going out and documenting everything, let's go out and do as we develop. So we started with looking at the warfare centers. We have an organization that includes warfare centers, system centers, and laboratories, and that's where our talent is. We have 35,000 scientists and engineers, and those scientists and engineers are basically doing support work for program offices. They're not really in mainstream acquisition. We have a laboratory that is developing all kinds of new research and development. They're doing 6.1, 6.2, 6.3 work. They are doing working directly with programs, but it's hit or miss, and their technologies may or may not end up in the hands of the warfighters, and that's where we really want the products to go, to the warfighters as fast as possible. Traditional acquisition has been, okay, we'll start the process, we'll get the RFP developed, we'll put together the contracts, well, first we have to identify the needs. So we've gone through, and it's taken 7 to 20 years in order to actually field some of our systems. So how do we do that faster? How do we do that better? Well, we take that same process, because we have to know what we have to know what the need is. We have to know what the requirements are. We have to look at the technical part of it. How do we get the product developed, and then how do we field it? Well, instead of doing that, we decided that we were going to bring all parties together. So we brought the operational people together, we brought the technical people together. We called it fleet engagement. And the fleet engagement included bringing the technical people, the operational people, and actually having a dialogue about what are the priority needs and how do you solve those needs without going through the tons of documentation that's needed in order to develop that. The ICD, we didn't go through all of the documentation. We just said, okay, the work that we're going to do with prototyping is going to inform those documents, to help us make those documents what they really need to be, as opposed to let's develop in our minds what we think they should be, and then go experiment to decide, then go start building it, and then 5 years into it we discover we've made a mistake. So rather than do that, we actually brought all of the people together. We didn't do it just from okay, we're going to bring this operational person in, or this and this technical person in. We engaged the entire organizations. We brought together the CNO. We brought together the secretariats. We brought together the labs. We brought together the warfare centers, the systems centers, and we brought them all into a space together, and we literally did workshops on, okay, what's the need? Let's make sure that we can clarify the need. Let's make sure that we get it right, and then we'll put it together. We'll will match those to some of the technologies that we have out there. Technologies, the labs and the warfare centers, they've been developing technologies for years. And so they had these in their back pocket. They had the autonomies. They had the cyber. They had all of the technologies that you could think of. We have tons of them. You know, I've reviewed 200 in 1 year, another 200, another 200, coming from a lot of different sources. And so we know that the technologies are there. How do we know whether or not those technologies really map to the needs of the warfighter? How do we know what the priorities are? So we brought all of these technologies and operational people together and had an honest dialogue about, okay, is this really what you want? Is this really what you need? What are the priorities that you need? And we worked with OpNav. We've worked with many. I mean, we tried to bring all of the stakeholders together so that we could make sure that we had a really good idea of what needed to be done. And then instead of going out and saying, okay, now that we have this, let's hand it over to a program office for them to develop it, we said, we're going to prototype it. Now we move into 6.4. So we got the 6.4 of the prototyping, and we said, okay, does this work? And then we were pretty much stopped. We were stopped because the one thing that we hadn't really done very well was put together the story for Congress. We put together a story. However, in doing all of this, we weren't able to go ahead and give it to Congress and get the money for a new start right that year. The period that you have to wait. 2-year program review, 2 year before you can get your POM, and then you have to set your POM for 5 years. Okay, it was too much for Congress to apprehend at one time, and so they have asked us to come in again and again to explain it, and we've got the process pretty much together, and we've done it about 3 times so far. We're continuing to do it so that we can refine the process and get it right. But we now have to learn how to get the products through Congress. How to make sure that when we say we want a prototype and it has to be rapid, and therefore we can't wait 2 years before we get money to start on this thing, because then it's too late. Okay, so the one thing that we finally started doing was putting together the policy. Now, putting together the policy was we had three areas that we were looking at. We had rapid development capabilities, and those rapid development capabilities looked at the GEONs and the JUONs. Those are the joint emergent operational needs, and we had the joint urgent needs. And so we looked at those and said, okay, those have to be handled right away. Those must have funding right now because there's a war going on. We have to make sure that that war gets the capabilities it needs so that the warfighter can do their job and be successful in it. And we have the second one would be MACO. Now MACO says, okay, we have our Maritime Accelerated Capability Office. Now that office, the MACO office, is where we bring in the capability. I mean, we identify a capability, and we want to go through the regular acquisition process, but we want to do it faster. And so we've put together policy so that we can get that through. Okay, and then the third area is the RPED, and that's the Rapid Prototyping, Experimentation, and Demonstration. And in that area, that's where we were having the most problems because that's where we couldn't get, we didn't want to wait 2 years before we could actually start doing our development. Okay, I mean, it's a long story, and I could probably go on and on in each of those areas, but I'm going to say I'm done and pass it to the next person.
Thank you, Cheryl.